Hello, everyone. Welcome to the talk of the Center of Aging and Population Sciences at the University of Texas. My name is Min Cha, a fourth-year PhD student in Sociology and Demography. We are particularly honored this afternoon to have Dr. Linda Waite, the George Herbert Mead Distinguished Service Professor of Sociology and Senior Fellow at the National Opinion Research Center, so-called NORC, at the University of Chicago, and the author of more than 160 scholarly articles and 6 books. Dr. Waite is a prominent researcher in the fields of social demography, aging, the family, health, sexuality, and social well-being. Her current research focuses on the National Social Life, Health, and Aging Project, which she directs. This study examines the links between social connectivity and health at older ages and has at its heart a nationally representative longitudinal survey of older adults. And she's the recipient of a merit award from the National Institute on Aging, National Institutes of Health, and an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. The title of Dr. Waite's presentation today is Does It Take Two to Tango? Cognitive Impairment and Sexuality in Older Couples and Older Individuals. Please join me welcoming Dr. Linda Waite.
This paper is joint with James Ivanuik and Ashwin Kotwal. The focus here is on cognitive impairment. And we know, and we're learning a lot more because this is a topic of a lot of research and policy interest, is that cognitive function tends to decline with age. The share of people with some cognitive impairment increases with age. In NSHAP, we estimate about 40% of adults 67 and over have some cognitive impairment. And this is shocking to demographers, but here it is. Alzheimer's disease and other dementias are now the 6th leading cause of death. Cognitive impairment raises the risk of functional loss. Activities of daily living may be independent activities of daily living may become impaired. There's can be a loss of independence, a need for care, even institutionalization, and as I just said, mortality. So I'm interested here in the link between cognitive impairment and social functioning. And the truth is, and I've looked at this literature a lot, we know almost nothing about the effect of cognitive limitation on social functioning, because almost all the research on the link between them has looked at the effect of the social on maintenance of cognition. If we get somebody to talk to their friends more or to go out more, will that protect their cognition? But in fact, maintaining social well-being is also very important in older ages and at any age. So if cognition affects social, and there's every reason to think it would, then we need to be concerned about that too. So this is the little we know that I've been able to find, and I've been digging through this literature for a while. In an article this year, and colleagues find that the majority of people with mild cognitive impairment talk on the phone and do activities with children, but very few of them participate in the community or do volunteer work. A paper in Journals of Gerontology Social Sciences by Wong and Say finds no differences in frequency of socializing with family and friends or attending religious services for people with either mild cognitive impairment or early dementia. And Zhang and Zhu find very small differences for people with MCI and without in contact with family or friends. That's sort of it. So here we have taken sexuality as a first look at social health, or a component of social health. Sexual wellness is a fundamental component of health throughout adulthood. The share of older adults who are sexually active declines with age, so it's not unreasonable to think about a link between declines in cognition and declines in sexuality. And sexuality is linked to other dimensions of health. In particular, sexuality is linked to quality of life, marital quality. It's linked to the development of cardiovascular disease risk factors, and it's linked to subjective well-being, among other dimensions. Now, one of the things that makes sexual activity particularly interesting when we're thinking about the effect of cognitive limitations on the social is that sexual activity can take a number of forms. And we're going to look specifically at sexual intercourse, sex with a partner. And there's a research literature, I found this very, very interesting, that argues that sexual intercourse is physiologically more satisfying than masturbation. Comparing the same people who had partnered sex and who masturbated, the release of prolactin, which is a hormone that's interpreted as measuring sexual satiety, is 400% greater after partnered sex than after masturbation. In addition, sexual intercourse has been linked to emotional well-being. So frequency of partnered sex, but not masturbation, is linked to better emotional well-being in a paper by Brody. What makes this interesting is that sex with a partner is fundamentally social and masturbation is not. So if we're thinking about how cognitive function affects social outcome, you have an outcome in sexuality where the social is really, really primary. The partnership is primary, and one where it's very little. So this is a model of how we think about the production of social well-being. This is the interactive biocycle social model of cognition and partnered sex. In this model, can you see my pointer? No?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, good, cool. So in this model, and this is the model of the production of health in the dyad, we have various kinds of capital. We have biophysical capital. This is the biophysical capital, like the physiology, the physical functioning, the health of the individual. We have those same kinds of resources in the partner. We also have psychocognitive capital, which would include emotional well-being, anxiety, depression, a positive active affect, and cognitive function in the individual and in the partner. And in this model, the characteristics or resources of each person can be converted into resources for other kinds of resources, like you can transfer cognitive capital into physical capital by, say, learning things that help you improve your physical health to get, say, medical treatment, or to you can also transmit across individuals. So one person's cognitive capital can aid the other person's, say, emotional well-being. And at the same time, these resources are can be used to construct social capital of the individual and of the dyad. In this case, we're looking at the psychocognitive capital of each of the people, and in this case, cognitive function, as affecting partnered and unpartnered sex. Any questions at this point? Okay, just interrupt. So in NSHAP, we ask a lot of questions about sex. And one of the questions we asked was about sexual activity. And by this, we meant partnered sexual activity. So sex with another person that involves some kind of sexual contact. The individual was allowed to define that however they wanted. If they thought it was sex, they did it with somebody else, it was sex. Masturbation, on the other hand, is sex stimulating the genitals for sexual pleasure, but we say in the question, not with a sexual partner. If you're doing that with a partner, it's partnered sex, it's not masturbation. So we measure cognition with a survey-adapted version of the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. This is a clinical measure. It's widely used in geriatric medicine to evaluate geriatric patients, their cognitive function. We spent a lot of time, the geriatricians on the project and others, modifying this measure for survey administration. We validated it in the clinic with the same people. They were given both the Montreal Cognitive Assessment as it's usually administered by a skilled clinician and scored, and as it was modified for survey administration. The survey adapted MOCA, as it's called, has 18 items covering 8 domains of cognitive function. I'm not going to go over those now. There are a number of publications I'm happy to point anybody to. It's now a well-validated measure. For this, our purposes here, we use clinical cut points that have been established for community dwelling samples, in which the whole MOCA has 30 points. You'll remember a while ago, this is the cognitive assessment that, that President Trump took and supposedly scored 30 points on. This is the one. So normal cognition is 23 to 30 points. Mild cognitive impairment is 18 to 20, and early dementia is 0 to 17 points. Now, it's important to point out, I think now, at this point, that we administered this cognitive measure to all our survey respondents. They all were community dwelling. We didn't interview people in nursing homes or any other facility. Everybody was living in the community. They all had to be able to sign the agreement to participate. And anyone who wasn't able to sign the agreement to participate could not be interviewed. So people were, and all of the people in the study basically completed the study. So we measured cognition within a sample that's functioning well. Nobody is institutionalized with dementia. And I think that that's important to point out. So what we ask in this study is, do older adults with cognitive impairment report less sexual activity? Are they less likely to be sexually active than older adults like them who are not impaired? We ask, is this the case for both partnered sex and for masturbation? And this is important for the reasons that I pointed out before. We argue that intimate dyads may be able to protect their social health as indicated by joint sexuality in the face of limitations of one of the partners. And we ask whether the gender of the partner matters. I'll argue a little bit more about how we're thinking about this kind of social relationship and this kind of health output. But please, if anybody has questions, raise your hand and please answer them. I mean, I'll answer them. I'll try to answer them. So what we do here is we look at any partnered sex in the past year. That's one outcome. And we look separately at any masturbation in the past year. We begin with a cross-sectional analysis of the association between cognitive limitations and partnered sex or separately masturbation. Then we looked at cross-lag models of the link between cognitive limitations and either partnered sex or masturbation between wave 2 of NCHAP and wave 3 of NCHAP, which is on average an interview in 2010 and an interview of the same people in 2015. The NCHAP sample also includes just under 1,000 dyads. These are people who are married, cohabiting, partnered with each other, both of whom completed the whole NCHAP interview. And this dyadic sample has been just a goldmine for understanding relationships. So in the last set of models, we look at the characteristics of the dyad as especially cognitive limitations in either or both of the partners and their production of sexuality together. So this just gives the characteristics of the sample. And here I've given you the characteristics of the partnered sample because those are the people that we're going to be looking at in the dyad. And partnered sex also, especially at older ages, is mostly confined to people who have partners. They don't have to be married to their partner. They can be cohabiting, or they can be intimate partners who don't live together. But very few older adults have are sexually active with somebody who isn't some kind of a partner. The second column here, the all column, is every single person who was interviewed in the wave. And you can see the characteristics by age, education, ethnicity, self-rated health, and gender. Questions? This is where it's hard not to be able to see people. Okay. These are the descriptives of the key variables here. So I'll spend a little bit more time on these. We ask people who had a partner when they last had sex, partnered sex with that partner. This is and we ask how often they have sex with that partner. What this variable shows, and this is the case for older adults in particular, that a substantial share of people with partners did not have sex with that person at all in the past year. That's any kind of sex at all. You can see in wave 2 that the share of people with partners who said they did not have sex with the person at all is about 40%. The share of all respondents, some of them obviously don't have partners, who didn't have any partnered sex at all is 51%. This is the 2015 values for these variables are for people who will appear in the longitudinal analysis. So people who were observed in wave 2, who were also observed, interviewed in wave 3. This is the people who were partnered in both waves. And you can see the share who say they had no sex with their partner went up to about half. For all respondents, it's 60% were not sexually active. For masturbation, we see the same pattern that 56% of the partners say they never masturbated last year, 60% of all respondents. That went up 5 years later to about 70% for both samples. This is important because when a variable has values from 0 and up, and there's a cluster at 0, that suggests that statistically and theoretically, you ought to think about the zeros and anything else separately from how much. So if you take the example of women's employment and hours of work, there's a cluster of, or men's employment, there's a cluster of people who don't work. And then within those who work, there's some number of hours, but they're sort of separate decisions. So for that reason, we focus here on any versus none. The how often is also important. That's just another step. Okay, so on cognitive function, here's what we see from the MOCA. And I want to point out here that basically we have no missing data on the measure of cognitive function. If people said that they didn't want to try one of the components of it, we asked them, then we scored it as basically 0. So if they didn't want to try to repeat a sentence, they did not get a point on that, but it was scored. So what you see here is that, and let's focus here on the limitations. In wave 2, 25%, 24% of both the partnered and the total sample showed mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is associated with some lower functioning on some dimensions of cognition. It could be problems with short-term memory. It could be executive function. There are some tests that look at ability to carry out a series of tasks, which is executive function, or numeracy, numbers. We use the -7s, which if you look at any of this is a very common cognitive numeracy test. Early dementia, so MCI may or may not affect ability to carry out normal activities. It doesn't affect doesn't affect everybody in the ability to carry out any activity. The results are sort of variable, but some people have some limitations that really get in the way, and some people are pretty much able to work around the stuff that they're not doing as well. Early dementia is a more substantial decline or loss or lower limitation in function, and is more likely to affect ability to carry out day-to-day tasks. What we see here is that 10 to 14% of the partnered and the total sample were scored as having early dementia in 2010, and basically the same percent scored as having early dementia in 2015. Remember, this is among those who returned. Mild cognitive impairment, you can see that these numbers don't differ very much, unlike sex, for the partnered versus all, suggesting there isn't selection on cognitive function into partnered versus not partnered. And that's pretty much the same in 2015 too. So for sex, we saw the partners had much higher levels of sexual activity than the unpartnered, but their cognition doesn't differ for the two samples. Okay, this is the first set of models. And here, what we look at is just in wave 2, 2010, what is the association between cognitive function and, in model 1, any partnered sex, and in model 2, any masturbation? What we see is that people with MCI, mild cognitive impairment, are no more and no less likely to be sexually active with a partner. This is, basic. I mean, it's not just basically 0, it's 0. And not more or less likely to have masturbated. People with early dementia are no more or less likely to have had partnered sex, but they are less likely to report that they masturbated at all. So here we see the association between cognitive function and any partnered sex in the cross section is basically absent, but people with the more severe cognitive limitations are less likely to be sexually active with themselves. And here, just quickly, women are less likely to have reported any partnered sex. The likelihood goes down with age. Masturbation, women are much less likely to report having masturbated, and the likelihood goes down with age. Both masturbation and partnered sex are more likely for people with higher levels of education. Physical health, this is interesting, affects partnered sex, but not masturbation. And being partnered has a big effect on partnered sex. I'm still working on the questions. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. Let Edgar know. Okay, so we talked about this, and what's interesting is the more social sexual component of sexuality or expression of sexuality is unaffected by the individual's own cognitive limitations, either mild cognitive impairment or early dementia. And masturbation does seem to be affected negatively by the more serious impairment. This is not a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. This is a screening tool for early cognitive changes, but early dementia is more substantial limitations, obviously, than mild cognitive impairment. Okay, so the next thing we do is we look at the longitudinal association, the reciprocal longitudinal association between cognitive impairment and partnered sex, cognitive impairment and masturbation. Here, I'm not showing you the control variables just to make things simpler. They don't change really from model to model. Education, age, excuse me, sex, partnership have the same sort of relationship in all of these models. This shows the effect of any partnered sex in 2010 on cognitive impairment in 2015. And you can see there is no effect. This shows in the red box the effect of mild cognitive impairment and early dementia on any partnered sex 5 years later. And you can see there's no relationship. Having mild cognitive impairment, and this is for people who remained in the partnered sample or in the total sample across waves. So what we see is there's no effect of cognitive impairment on sexuality 5 years later. This is the same model, but for masturbation. And what we see is that any masturbation in 2010 has no effect on cognitive impairment in 2015. So in this case, and in the case of partnered sex, there's no evidence that if you could intervene to encourage people to have more partnered sex or to masturbate more, that it would maybe help maintain or improve their cognition. This is
I do have a question. Should I save it for the end, or do you want questions now?
No, now is fine.
Okay, so one of the things I'm thinking about is you're not finding effects for MCI over time, and is that correct, that MCI is not, the MCI progression to dementia is or is not being predicted by the sexual behavior?
Right, that's right. So the partnered sex here in this model is predicting cognitive impairment at wave 3. So we're not looking at changes in cognitive impairment. We're looking at, but we are holding constant the cognitive measure at wave 2 to predict cognitive impairment at wave 3 as predicted by any partnered sex. And there's no effect.
Okay. The one thing I guess I'm wondering about is MCI. There's like 2 forms. There's the amnesiac form, which usually progresses. No, there's no difference there.
Yeah, I don't know that we can identify the 2 forms.
Okay.
We certainly don't. We haven't done that in anything I've done. We do have the separate scores for each of the 8 domains of cognitive impairment. We've looked at that a little, but not much.
Okay. Okay.
In this context, looking at differences in sexuality.
Okay. Okay. And if you're okay with other questions, I see there's one other hand up. Is that all right? Go for it.
Here, I would have already asked. Yes, please.
Hulu, is that how I pronounced it? I see your hand is up.
Yeah. Hi, Linda, it's Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
It's very interesting. And I'm just the results, since you didn't find the significant effect of the cognitive impairment on sex. So I was wondering, because when I talk with some people working in the nursing home or some with older patient doctors, they actually talk about a lot of the older people with dementia are sexual abused. You know, so I was wondering, because so the sex types. One is the voluntarily wanted sex. The other is unwanted sex. So I wonder if it's possible, because the older people who has dementia, the cognitive impairment, are more likely to be sexual abused and less likely to have wanted sex. So when you put them all together, so you will not see the difference in the sexual activity, because you cannot see it's wanted sex or unwanted sex. So I was wondering, I know the NSHAP, there is their question, wave 2, I'm sure in wave 2, I'm not sure wave 3. So they have question about the unwanted sex. So I wonder if you distinguish the sex between wanted sex and unwanted sex. It's
so the question on wanted versus unwanted sex, if I'm recalling correctly, and we didn't look at it here, is there's a question that's something like, when your partner wants to have sex, how often do you agree? Do you remember the question that asks about how often did you have sex when you didn't want to? There's a sexual problems question. How often did you lack interest in sex or had pain during sex? But I don't remember a question on how often did you have sex when you didn't want to. I should look that up.
I think, yeah, anyway, so I was just thinking about because the results is not significant, so I would try to think about what's going on here. So I just think.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Maybe yeah, you can when you see different type, different type of sex, you may find the difference there, because that is when I work with some doctors in the working the older people. They actually told me about a lot of older people with dementia, they are sexually abused. So that's why I came up this idea when I see.
And remember, a lot of, or most of the people who are having partnered sex are living in the community. They're not demented. They may have early dementia, which is a much milder form, and they're with a sexual partner. So my guess is that the people who are being sexually abused are not being sexually abused by their husband or their wife or their cohabiting partner. And I'm actually thinking, and the team is I think agrees that we've maybe given older adults with some cognitive limitations too little credit for knowing what they want. I mean, it's a little, I don't know, paternalistic to say, if you start having memory problems, if you start having trouble with executive functioning, that means that if you have sex with your husband or your wife, that it somehow is more often coerced or more likely to be coerced. I don't think we have any evidence of that. In nursing homes where it's, people are much more disabled, I think we still don't know how often it's sexual abuse. Anyway, I think that that's a really important issue. And I guess part of what I'm saying is, let's keep an open mind on that. And this is not a really demented nursing home population, and they're having sex with their long-term partner. But those are important, really important points, and I'll get back to that. And let's both look for the question on unwanted sex.
Yeah.
But I
Just to let you know, Linda, my student Shanna Shin, you know,
yes.
her, and she and I, and actually we are working on a paper. It's related, but we work on a different angle. So we look at how sex may affect the cognition. So it's different causality, different direction of the causal relationship. I don't have a solid result right now, but I think that's another way to look at the problem. Actually, there are some lab psychologists. They did some experiment among the rats, and they found the sexual behavior of the rats actually affect the cognition. So that's actually expanded my thinking about why sex may affect cognition. I just let you know we are working on another paper related to this.
Sure.
It'll be interesting to see, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is really an important set of questions, and I'll talk a little bit later about why it's much more than just sex. Okay, so the last set of analyses looked at characteristics of the dyad. And remember, this could be a marital dyad, a cohabitational dyad, or a special friends dyad. And we looked at here the effect of MCI in the wife or in the husband, early dementia in the wife or in the husband on their joint sexuality, partnered sex. So what you can see is there's no relationship. But what this doesn't tell you is anything about the couple. This tells you about the wives, it tells you about the husbands, but it doesn't tell you about the two of them together. So the next set of models shows the dementia within the couple. The first category is that neither one is impaired, cognitively impaired. The second category, this is a series of dummies, is that the husband only is impaired, the wife only is impaired, both are impaired. And this is the association of impairment in the couple at wave 2, on sexuality at wave 3. We get the same result on sexuality at wave 2, but you can see that here, the chances that they had sex in the last year are not lower if the husband was impaired, but the wife was not, if the wife was impaired, but the husband was not, or if both of them were impaired. They're just as likely as couples in which both have normal cognition to report that they were sexually active at all in the past year.
Linda, so the effects, I'm not sure I followed, but are the effects of sexual activity on cognition the same for men and women? And
so we did that, but I didn't report that in the last set of models. That would be here. But we did do those interactions, and there were very few gender interactions.
Interesting. Okay.
And we do know that physical health is gendered. The effect of physical health on sexual activity is gendered in that the husband's physical health is important for whether they remain sexually active, and the wife's is much less so. But here, cognition didn't make a difference. It was not more or less important for the wife or the husband. Okay, so, and you can see that here. If either one was impaired, it didn't matter if it was the husband or if it was the wife, or even, and this is a little surprising, both. If both of them have impairment, they're just as likely to report that they had sex in the last year. And this is their sort of joint report. We looked at what she said about their sexual activity and about what he said, and mostly they were within a category of each other and reporting sexual frequency. So this is their joint view of their joint activity. And this is the difference in their cognitive scores. And we can see that that doesn't make any difference either. So basically, when we look at partnered sex as reported by individuals in community dwelling individuals, some of them measured with mild cognitive impairment, some of them measured with more serious impairment, suggesting early dementia, that it's not associated with their partnered sex, either cross-sectionally or longitudinally. And the only effect we find, which sort of makes sense, is that people with early dementia are less likely to report any masturbation than similar people who have normal cognitive function. And that partners seem to maintain their shared sexual activity regardless of who in the partnership is cognitively limited, or even if both are. So here's, I think, where this is particularly interesting and points to ways that we might be interrogating the relationship between one kind of health, in this case, cognitive function, and another kind of well-being, in this case, sexual well-being. What we're thinking is that it's clear that some social behaviors draw on deeply embedded relationships with strong norms surrounding them and patterns of interaction and affection, closeness, and that these are often these relationships of long standing. So we're thinking of sibling relationships, parent-child relationships, intimate partners, long-standing friendships, long-standing close friendships. And that other social relationships are more distant, shorter duration, where the individuals, you can swap individuals in and out, like if you're volunteering or if you're going to a book club, you don't have anything like the same kind of relationship with the people in this group as you would have with your family. And so what we're thinking, and there is a little bit of evidence in the literature that I cited earlier, that these close family relationships based on the social dyad or very small group, long-standing, culturally supported, deeply embedded, may be quite resistant to damage from mild cognitive impairment or early dementia. And that if that's the case, I think everybody's worried that the number of people in the world who have Alzheimer's disease or associated dementias is supposed to skyrocket in the next 30 years. And the question is how to take care of people, how to support people, how to support their families. And if we can draw on what we suspect are the strengths of these long-standing, close, deeply embedded relationships to maintain social function, if we can help them do what they're trying to do, that may help us provide social and medical needs to people and families who are facing cognitive limitations and even serious cognitive decline. So I point all of us to thinking more about how relationships and people can be resilient in the face of these challenges, and how we can build on and support that resilience. And I'm happy to take questions at this point. I'm going to switch it to the other mode so I can actually see anybody.
Well, Linda, I'll jump in again for a second here. So, I'm a little, I don't know if you know that I'm a little more psychological in my training, at least.
I do know that.
So I had a chapter that I wrote for the Handbook of Cognitive Aging on social ties and the predictive. It's a couple of years old now, but I wrote it with Steve Zarrett and another colleague. And so Steve's kind of an expert on dementia. And what we concluded with regard to like social integration is that it looked like, there's longitudinal data from the Baltimore study and such, where they have controlled for initial social. They're looking over waves at that interchange. Are you withdrawing, or is it causal, or is it, that you withdraw when you are cognitively impaired? And what we concluded in that chapter was actually that there might be protective effects when people were not in that more severe neurodegenerative state. So that once you get to a threshold, it really can't do anything for you because the brain is deteriorating. But until you begin to get to that point, so Steve felt like the literature he was reading was saying no. And we felt like the literature we were reading was saying, there's something going on. It's not the biggest effect. It's not the only thing, nor would we expect, things are multi-determined, but it seemed to be having a protective effect. So that was kind of where we were. And I don't know what you think of that, if that fits with what you've read, if it's, different, but I just throw that out there.
No, so I read some of the psychology literature, but and which I find is very interesting. But still it's as I read it, and please send me sites that look at the other direction, but mostly it's looking at the effect of being socially active on maintaining cognition. And that literature seems to suggest that so the social stuff does matter for maintaining cognition. I don't think it all finds that there are strong effects, but what I'm interested in is how people maintain social well-being in the face of cognitive limitation.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I get the difference in the way that we're thinking, and it makes perfect sense. And I'll let, did you have another question, Kathy? I thought I saw your hand up. Did you want to ask something?
Oh, no.
Well, then I'll make one other comment, which is kind of interesting, is I've kind of been interested in this in what Kathy was talking about in like nursing homes. And a few years ago in Iowa, there was a lawsuit where a man, this one, he had sex with his wife and they'd had this long, loving, and the stepchildren accused him of rape. And it was dismissed, but in the midst of that, there was
charges were brought against him.
What were?
I think he was charged. I don't know that he was tried, but he was charged.
Yeah, he was charged. And then, but in the midst of that, I read like this article, that was saying sex is what he should be doing. And this nursing home director said, we do everything possible to facilitate sex. If people are disabled, we work on new positions. She's like, we don't take away ice cream. We don't take away things people can still enjoy just because they're cognitive. And it just like fits with what you're talking about so well. And I don't know, maybe you read all that, but it was just a story that really stuck with me.
Oh, me too. Absolutely. And our results suggest that that people do want to maintain often the same kind of sexual life they had in the past. And that makes sense. Often people want to have the same social life that they have and that they had in the past, the same relationship with their children and so on, their friends. So it makes sense to me.
This strikes me as another way that spouses, it's like if you have a hearing impaired spouse, it's another way that spouses can kind of help each other to keep functioning.
And if also too, if what you're talking here about is something you do together, then helping the other person remember or do the parts of the joint activity, it seems to me is more likely to reach a conclusion than if you're trying to do it by yourself and there's nobody to help you fill in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so Rebecca had a question too. Yeah, we control for self-rated health. And what we find is that it's connected to partnered sex, that people with poor self-rated health are somewhat less likely to be sexually active with a partner, but not more likely or less likely to masturbate. And we haven't here spent a lot of time on
various
conditions, but we do have that information.
Thank you. Thank
Linda,
you.
before we wrap up, I do want to say that for years I have wanted to thank you for doing this incredible work, because I can remember lecturing in the 1990s when I was a brand new assistant professor saying we know nothing about sex in old age and no one's ever gotten the data and no one's ever had the guts, if you will. And your work has just completely transformed everything we understand, and it's just so important. And so I'm glad to just have the opportunity to say that publicly and to you.
Thank you. So I can say that our team extended this work to older adults, but Ed Lauman is really the pioneer in studying sex in a consistent way from a survey research perspective in his 1992 study, and we built on that. But yeah, so sex in older adulthood has been pretty much ignored, and I think that that's changed.
Yeah.
I hope that views of people in nursing homes who may be interested in having a sex life can be seen at least more neutrally and not necessarily as just not up to it, not able to consent. I'm sorry, Rebecca, you had a question, but it flashed off the screen.
She's asking, you probably get this question a lot, how differential is the report of sexual activity among low education or Hispanic groups?
Well, what's interesting is Hispanics, all else equal, are more likely to report sexual activity. By education, yes, it's lower likely to both masturbate and to be sexually active for very low levels of education. If you look back at the results, there's not a big difference between some college and college in partnered sex, but there is in masturbation. And I'm sorry, Rebecca, the other question was selectivity. We used inverse probability weighting, but of course, people who are more cognitively impaired, who are sicker, are more likely to attrit because they died or because they're too sick to interview.
Well,
we're past the 1 o'clock hour, so we should wrap up. But Linda, I want to echo Kieran's sentiment, and we're very grateful for all that you've done for the field and your data collection efforts overall. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
It was my great pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and listening.